And now to our first conversation. We see Nigeria's public debt that reached 134 trillion naira. That's about $91 billion by the end of the second quarter of 2024, marking a significant rise of about 10.35% from 121 trillion. That's $91 billion reported in the first quarter. So they have a total debt stock, 134 trillion. Foreign, that's about 63 trillion. And for domestic, 66 trillion. So we see domestic debt outperforming our foreign debt. So let's analyze all of this now. Join us to unpack this debt stock is Mr. Dr. Okiti. He's the CEO of Think Business Africa and the convener of Africa Business Convention. It's great to have you on the show. Good morning.
Good morning, Lottie. Thank you so very much for inviting me here.
Great to have you. So 134 trillion naira, that's the total debt stock, about $91 billion. Debt to GDP ratio, something around 50%. Should we be worried?
We should be worried. We should be worried for two reasons. One is that we have seen the most dramatic increases in debt in the last decade. And as the figure that you showed there, we have not only seen the dramatic increases in the last decade, we have also seen that the naira equivalent to pay those debt has also gone up dramatically following naira's depreciation, especially in the last 1 year and a half. So yes, we should be worried. And more so, we have debt that is growing well beyond the rate of economic growth in the economy. So there is a reason why we should be worried. And of course, in terms of the revenue to pay back, that is not also growing as far as the debt. So if you look at all the metrics surrounding the growth in Nigeria's debt, there is cause to worry, yes.
And, looking at all the debt we've, racked up, so far, you connect that with development, it seems it's not matching, at all. So is it that, Nigeria's debt is not profiting or developing, the economy, but is it that it's just, just a few people are enjoying Nigeria's debt, so far? Because you look around and you can't see where this money is going into.
Okay, so in the period that we have had significant increases in Nigeria's debt, if you ask any government official, even in the last administration and this current one, if you ask them why is debt growing, they will tell you that they are actually borrowing money in order to support economic growth in the country or in the economy. However, if you look at the growth that we have seen, if you look at June 2023, for instance, we're talking about 71 trillion. That's in June 2024. In June 2024, 71 trillion. In March, we saw 65 trillion, and then 59 trillion in June 20. For 8 trillion in 2015. So you have moved from 8 trillion to the region that we now see, which is around 113 trillion. So if you ask them what has happened to Nigerian debt, they will say they embarked on those debt stream in order to support economic growth. But why debt has grown in naira terms by over 1,000% in the last 10 years, growth has only averaged 2% on average in the same period. So there is no correlation between the debt growth and economic growth, which is what we are supposed to see. So when you look at everything, whether it's revenue, debt to GDP, the capacity to repay the debt, the impact on macroeconomic instability, the impact on inflation, of course, what has also driven the depreciation of the naira. So there is nothing that supports there's nothing positive in the growth and the debt that we are seeing in the last decade. Yes.
So is it safe to say we just stop borrowing at this point?
Well, we can't stop borrowing. However, we can put a limit to the growth in debt. In every analysis and show I have appeared on in relation to debt, I have said that look, the rule for debt at this stage in Nigeria's economic trajectory now, the rule should be our debt should not grow beyond the real rate of economic growth. So now we are doing about 3%. So I do not expect that Nigeria's debt should grow beyond that level at this junction. Anything beyond that 2-3% is just contributing to the inflation and of course to the depreciation of the naira that we have seen. And there's something very, very ironic in Nigerian policy environment, and I believe many people would have understood this. Nigerian fiscal and monetary policy environment is very, very unique. So you have a situation in which all the problems, all the contributions to current macroeconomic stability comes from fiscal, because it is fiscal that goes to borrow, it is fiscal that embarks on deficit, currently almost 10% of 10% of GDP. Meanwhile, the rule says it should be about 3 to 3.5% of GDP. But we are currently doing almost 10% in terms of deficit expenditure. Those are the contributions to macroeconomic stability. However, when it now comes to where do we get the solution to Nigeria's macroeconomic stability, then we turn to monetary policy measures. It doesn't work that way. That's not the way economics work. The source of the problem is fiscal. The source of the solution should also be fiscal. We have a challenge if we continue to have successive government that cannot rein in their expenditure. They can't rein in their expenditure. If you cannot rein in your expenditure and you continue to borrow with the expectation that there will be growth in the future, it does not work that way. It is the same growth in debt that is leading to macroeconomic instability, and it is that macroeconomic instability that is preventing us from growing the Nigerian economy. So that is the trajectory that we see, that's the process that we see, and that is the transmission mechanism in Nigeria. So for us to grow, for us to stabilize, we need to stabilize the rate of growth of debt, especially, the nature of our own debt, which obviously directly leads to increases in money supply. That is what we have to deal with. Anything short of 3% growth in debt over the next 3, 4, 5 years, so that we can consolidate, we can stabilize and consolidate economic growth and improve the relative income and wealth of Nigerians compared to other economies over the next 3, 4, 5 years. It's not, if we don't do that, then we just continue to go down the drain.
All right, and looking at the debt stock, you see foreign and you see domestic debt. Domestic debt seems to have outperformed foreign debt, with this current debt stock that we see. And the central bank, trying to rein in inflation, they've had to carry out some operations in the open market. So is this a bright spot, looking at this debt stock, seeing that it's more domestic?
If I heard you very well, you're asking if the preference for domestic debt is something that should be welcome. Is that correct?
Yeah, so is it a bright spot seeing that domestic debt is higher than foreign debt?
Well, we know, domestic debt is higher than foreign debt because it's very, very easy to actually acquire domestic debt. But domestic debt is not free debt. The opportunity cost of domestic debt are very, very huge. Don't forget that the capital market that the federal government and the state government go for domestic debt is also supposed to be the capital market that businesses also go for debt. That's number one opportunity cost that is rising there. Then the second point is that the source of the domestic debt actually directly increases the money supply in the economy. So if you look at the increases in the rate of inflation that we have seen, increases in, and of course the naira weakness that we have seen, that is the source. The source is that debt. That is what is driving the rate of inflation. Of course, there are structural issues, don't get me wrong. But the debt that we have seen at the rate in which it is being acquired, that is what is leading to rises in inflation and the weakening of the naira. So who is losing? Those that are losing are the businesses and me and you in the Nigerian economy. Because how are we losing? Our naira 10 years ago is not the same as it is today. Because one, you have increases in debt, but growth has not caught up with increases in debt. So we are losing. Our relative wealth just 2 years ago is not what it is today. The size of the economy was about 500 billion US dollars almost about a decade today. Now it is half of that. So it is the growth in debt that is translating to the increases in the inflation and, of course, the depreciation of the naira that is eroding the relative wealth of Nigerians. So there is no free debt, whether it's domestic or whether it is foreign. We must deal with debt as something that is very, very critical at this point of Nigeria's history, and that is any growth in debt that is more than 2-3% over the next 4, 5, 10 years is what is causing rises in inflation and, of course, weakening of the naira. And that is not something we can continue to endure.
All right, definitely I can relate to, what you've spoken about there. That's purchasing power, because I'm not feeling that power, looking at how the naira has weakened, so far when it comes to my purchasing power. But let's take it on to Africa now. We see the likes of Kenya as at June, about $70 billion as the total debt stock. Ghana, that was sitting about $40 billion as of February. And Egypt, $25 billion as at March 2024. So, these countries, we've seen some of them act to, try and restructure, some of their debts at this point. We've heard all the screaming headlines coming out of Ghana. So it's looking like Africa is having a debt problem, right now.
Yes. I mean, almost every African economy has debt problems. So, and let me just say this in case there is nothing wrong in debt per se. There are two things we have to watch for when it comes to debt: the source of the debt, and of course the growth of the debt. So when you look in the Nigerian situation, if you look at the sources of our debt at the moment, those sources are not sustainable because of the opportunity cost. If you look at the growth, those growth is not supporting economic growth as it was intended to be. So that is also not sustainable. But if you now look at the economies that you have just mentioned, the Ghana, I think you got, if I look at your data again, I think there was Ghana, there was Kenya, and I think there was probably Egypt. If you look at those economies, you will say that in US dollars, it looks massive. However, if you look at Nigerian situation, you will notice that in US dollars, in June 2015, it was 63 billion US dollars. But in today's US dollars, it is $91 billion. So it doesn't look dramatic. However, it is because we have severely depreciated. Nigerian currency has been depreciated significantly in the last 18 months. And in that last 18 months, that is why the difference between 2015 and today is just about 44%. However, in Naira terms, the difference between June 2015 and June 2024 is 1,000%. So our debt growth in almost a decade is 1,000%. That is not sustainable.
All right, definitely. We'll still unpack some more, about this debt. I've been talking to Dr. Okiti, the CEO of Think Business Africa. We'll take a quick break now. When we come back, we'll get a check on what to expect for the Nigerian economy. That's in a moment. Just stay with us. Welcome back. Well, as African countries are trying to avoid the kiss of debt, let's see how Nigeria can make that happen. We still have Dr. Okiti, the CEO of Think Business Africa. Thank you for staying on, Doctor. So, Doctor, now that subsidies gone, and the FX market has been floated. Do we see less pressure on rising debt? Will it rise at a slower pace?
That is not what I think is happening. I think there's still pressure on debt, despite what I consider the most dramatic transfer of resources from the private sector to the public sector following the removal of subsidies. So let me take you back a bit to the period before the government ended the first subsidies. There were three arguments that were made before the policy. I'm talking three arguments in terms of decades. We've been making three arguments that, if the government removes first subsidy, then we will have resources for education. If the government removes first subsidy, then we'll have resources for health. And of course, if the government removes first subsidy, we will have resources for infrastructure. That is not what we have seen in the last 18 months. So we have not seen that kind of expenditure in the last 18 months. So that's the first. The second thing is that despite the removal of fuel subsidy and of course the liberalization of the exchange rate that has transferred significant resources into public policies, we have also not seen the slowdown in the growth of debt. So that's number two. So this was the removal of fuel subsidy. Fuel subsidy before it was removed was adding to government debt. That was the argument. So when you remove the fuel subsidy, you are supposed to start to see a slowdown in government debt, but that is not what we are seeing.
All right, definitely. As this year is winding down, what are you seeing for 2025?
2025, I think the outlook for 2025, I think is going to continue for the current trajectory. But let me just make one important point. In 2024, there was no payment of any external debt in terms of euro. In terms of euro, I'm not talking of other kind of debt, but in terms of the euro, the euro bond, there was no payment in 2024. There are some payments that are due next year, so that is something to look out for. That's something to look out for. That will also have implications for obviously. For sourcing dollars and of course for foreign exchange in relation to that. In relation to the economy, I think my expectation is that we will see some sort of stability because we have started to see that stability. I'm not saying that the condition has improved dramatically, but we are seeing some sort of stability. Let me tell you what I mean by that. One, I don't see inflation going higher than the current trajectory. So it's still very high, but it is now going to be above stable. That's number one. Number two, also, if you look at what has happened in the last 3-4 months, the exchange rate has also been above stable. Yes, there's a difference of actually 100 naira here, 150 here, 200 here. But compared to what we have seen in the period before then, it is relatively stable. So my expectation for 2025 is that we'll see some sort of stability. And hopefully that will give businesses some room for them to be able to plan slightly ahead. Unlike the fighting of fires that we have seen in the last 18 months.
Hopefully all the fires subdue. Thank you so much. It was great having your perspective. Dr. Ogo Okiti is the CEO, Think Business Africa, convener of the Africa Business Convention. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me this one.